What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Casual Podcast with your boy Brian, the Casual Brian. Today's podcast is brought to you specifically by the Casual Jazzer because we have a very awesome guest. We have Jeremy from We ArtPlay with us today, and we're going to talk a little bit about his page, a little bit about himself, and all things jazz. So, thank you for stopping by. If you haven't already subscribed, please be sure to subscribe or follow, which is ever appropriate. We're coming to you live from Facebook, Twitter, Twitch, and we're going to be dropping this on the Casual Jazzer page. So be sure to check that out. And if you are checking it out for the first time, be sure to follow us. All right. And with that, welcome to the podcast, Jeremy.
Hey, great to be here, Brian.
Great to
Appreciate it.
have you. Great to have you. It's interesting going. We were talking a little bit about my normal podcast where I talk about everything. It's good to actually have somebody to talk with, kind of keep me like reined in, you know?
Instead of just talking to yourself. Yeah, I feel that.
It definitely feels like talking to yourself, at least for the first 10 minutes. And then after 10 minutes, I don't even notice anymore. So
You don't even know what's coming out.
no, I don't. I just let it flow. I mean, I enjoy it. And I always go back and check it out to see, like, man, was that too ranty? It feels fine with me. Most people seem to enjoy it, especially when I keep it around 20 minutes. I used to do it for an hour, and that just got out of hand. Yeah, man, I found your page on Instagram. I love it. It's amazing. I love what you're doing. Can you talk a little bit about your page, how you got started, and what gave you the idea to start the page?
Yeah. So I guess I've been, serious about the page and promoting myself through Instagram and building a whole business since the beginning of the pandemic.
Okay.
Instagram is maybe almost a year old now that I've been posting every day. But before the pandemic, I was a school teacher. I was a music teacher. Taught elementary and middle school for a couple of years, then middle and high school for another year. And that was the year when the pandemic hit.
Yeah.
And of course, the first thing my school did was scrap all my music, all the music programs. So they're like, you can have 1 hour a week for all your class. They all meet together. And it just basically got totally sidelined as it happens with music.
Yeah.
So at that point, I was like, you know what? I'm going to make my own school. I think I can do better than this.
Nice.
And that's when I started prototyping these online classes, getting to know how can I teach piano over Zoom? How can I bring a community together? And this is what's developed from that. So that was the inspiration and the motivation to make this happen.
So two things are crazy to me. One, that you've only been doing this for a year. And then two, you from the very beginning, you always wanted it, or you always designed it to be a course or like a class. I thought it was because a lot of musicians, they start posting music on the page and then they kind of find something that works and then like narrow in on that. But you had this conceived from the start.
Yeah, we were talking about this before. I went to school to study jazz piano performance. So I wanted to be performing. Okay. I was studying at Northwestern. My first gig out of school was on a cruise ship up in Alaska. And they were recruiting hard at Northwestern. So they got me early. They got me into the contract. And I guess I got very disillusioned with the performing world from that experience, to say the least.
What line was it?
It was a Celebrity.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
I did my time on the cruise ship. I definitely can empathize with you.
Yeah, when you say that outside the jazz community, they're like, "Oh wow, that's crazy," and then you say it in the jazz community, they're like, "Oh, what line did you do?" Everybody's done it.
We've all done it. It's yeah. I don't want to say too much about the cruise industry. Beautiful places, sometimes nice people, but soul crushing.
Yeah, when you live in the bowels of the ship.
Yes.
Yeah.
People don't get that. They don't understand what it's like to work on a ship.
Yeah.
But were you part of like like when I did it, I did the first time I did it, I was part of like this all-purpose band. So it was the party band, the show band, the lounge band.
Exactly. Yeah. They would just we would play 2 musicals every night. We would do a big band set a couple times a week. Big band. It was like 7 of us, I think, but we called it that. Yeah, we did the parties. We did guest performers every week. There'd be a new guest performer on the ship, and they would just hand us music and say, "Okay, we're performing this in 2 hours.
Yeah.
Work."
Yeah.
And that was that life for 6 months.
So okay, so the pandemic hits. Is the stuff that you're putting out, was that from what you were already teaching, or is it all pretty much like just new, fresh ideas that you've been working on the page?
It's, I would say, more new, fresh ideas. Obviously, I'm bringing what I've learned in the conservatory, but the way that I learned it requires being at a conservatory, and
Right.
like very few people get that kind of opportunity, and I'm lucky to have it. But I want to bring that to others who aren't necessarily going to have 4 years to devote to just studying music. I mean, that's a rare thing. So the way that I'm restructuring this material that I've learned is to make it more accessible. That's really, really important to me, that it's simple and it's fun. It's fun to learn. I don't want to be talking about nines with sharp 11s and parallel structures, and like I can throw those words in, but it should just be a simple thing that people can easily create beautiful art, beautiful music.
So
I'm
sorry.
sorry. Go ahead.
I was gonna say, so would you say that is like the heart of what you're doing, trying to make the music more accessible and more, less daunting?
Yeah, and especially improvised music. I think that's really what I've been focusing on. There's plenty of YouTube tutorials out there if you want to learn a specific song and just copy the notes. That's great. But if I'm focused more on a deeper understanding of the music, that you can create it and understand what you're creating and just have fun with it. That's kind of the art, where the word art play came from. My wife and I came up with this concept of, art's usually thought of as this like high society. It's only in a museum. It's inaccessible to us mere mortals, and only really great geniuses can create it. But I don't think that's what art is. Art is something beautiful that a human being creates. It can be anything. It can be gardening, dancing, sewing, talking, like right now. Anything can be art. And that's why the term art play comes in, is that we can play with art. We can take these advanced concepts, but we can play with them. We can break them down into these basic building blocks, these essential elements, and then rebuild our own creation with that in a much more accessible way. When you're dealing with individual building blocks and stacking them, as opposed to, okay, I'm going to play this incredible piece of music and have no idea what I'm playing. I'm just going to try to copy those notes the best I can. It's a different mentality. So I guess I would say that that's really the approach, is to make art playful, to make art accessible. And the we is also important, that it's not just us by ourselves, that we're doing it within a community to inspire each other, motivate each other, hold each other accountable. It's more fun, I think, to learn together. And through this process, I've realized that it's also essential, that it's not just more fun, but our learning is 10 times as effective in a group as opposed to just by ourselves watching YouTube videos, or even with video courses. As soon as we're in a group with the same exact content, all of a sudden we have these new perspectives and new inspirations to just grow so much more. And so that's why I'm really pushing for the community to build, because I think that's actually the most essential part of all this. The content can be great, but if there's no community, then there's no push to dive into it.
So I love everything that you're saying, and it's interesting because so my background is hip hop, church, classical classical saxophone, heavy into classical music. Went to school, studied jazz and then composition, and then came back and moved to New York and got back into playing in churches and playing with like hip hop artists. So I find that it's hard for people to really, they feel intimidated getting into jazz and listening to jazz and playing jazz if they're not, like, if they haven't studied jazz, you know what I mean? And so it seems like your approach is going to help so many more people understand that this is not, it doesn't have to be the way that most people conceive of it. Now, I don't know if it's our fault for the way that jazz is taught and the way that we kind of I know how I carried myself when I went to North Texas, and I don't think I was very accessible. I definitely thought that I definitely think that we have kind of like a mentality that jazz is this higher art, and either you get it or you don't. And if you don't get it, then you're lower, which is funny because, but then we want a huge fan base and a huge audience. So it's like, what, how do you how do you balance for yourself personally between wanting to make an art that's true to what you hear, but also wanting to be accessible to people?
Man, that's a great question. Because you don't want to compromise. You don't want to dumb down what you're doing or
Right.
compromise on what you believe is beautiful just to be accessible. I think authenticity is still essential. But what I think it comes to is having some element of the music be accessible. It doesn't have to be like every single element of it is easy to follow. Anybody can do it. You don't need any kind of training. You don't have to even ever heard of jazz. But if there's a melody that somebody can follow, if there's a story behind it, if you know in the lyrics or the life story of the artists, those are the kind of things that can make music that can be infinitely complex, or above, or whatever you want to call it, still accessible. So there has to be some element in there, but it doesn't have to be a compromise of all of our values to get there.
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
that's how I would see it.
I like that. I think that there, in my opinion, I think that we as the jazz community can do a better job of finding those bridges to people. You know what I mean? And not
Mm.
simply give them the kind of the, if you don't get it, then that's on you. It's like, well, you know, what is the point of our music? Yeah, it's tough for me because I personally feel that music is meant for the community. You make music that's from you, but it's meant to be shared. You know, it's like fine dining, food. You know, no matter how fine the dining is, it's still meant for somebody to consume. And
Mhm.
so I wonder, is it a matter of education? It, you know what I mean, to help more people be able to get this music, because I'm concerned that jazz is boxing itself in, and
Yeah.
it's alienating itself from people that want it. You know what I mean? And I think that it can't just be, and this is no shade in any way to Robert Glasper, but it can't just simply be to make it hip hop fusion,
Mm.
or put backbeats on everything. It's I think that there has to be a way that we can make all of it accessible. Do you think that more jazz education for the masses is the key, or is it just more pages like what you're doing, that
Mm.
make it, that break it down and make it more easy to understand and enjoy, I think.
Yeah. Another good question. Um, I would say that the most important element is listening.
Yes.
Musicians need to be listening, not just to themselves and the music that they're creating, and the audience that's telling the niche audience that's telling them this is great, you're so innovative, or whatever. They got to be listening to the people and responding to that.
Yeah.
What are other people listening to? Meet them where they are. Maybe the hip hop beat is a good way to do that, because people listening to hip hop, people like backbeats. You can start to throw those things in, but I think we can go a level deeper, uh, and really listen to what people are looking for, um, and engage people with that perspective. And I think that it really is that simple. what that means for each artist is going to be different,
Yeah.
because it depends on their audience. But as far as the role of education in that, I don't think everybody's going to want to be educated in this way. I don't
Yeah.
think everyone should be forced to. But in the context of schools, where people are forced to, there's a required music class in many schools, that shouldn't be based around this idea of there's this most music education that I've encountered. There's a classical canon. There's these great geniuses who lived way too long ago, and we're just trying to just get a little closer to that beautiful genius that we could never really get to. And we're just copying that. We're learning, about their lives or about the music they created, but we have no chance of creating it ourselves. That's not,
Right.
it's not even mentioned, let alone addressed as a part of education. And I think that would make jazz and music in general more accessible and open up people's ears to more complex or more, I don't want to call it advanced, but yeah, really more complex is what it is. These denser harmonies and more dissonances and more angular melodies, is that, oh, I can create this too.
Yeah.
I
Which
think
is
that empowerment is key through
right.
education.
And again, I love the concept of playing with art, allowing people to see that they can play with it. You talked about listening, and I think that's 100% right. What are some of the things that you are currently listening to, and what were some of you, if it's changed, what were some of the things that you used to listen to? So, what did you used to listen to, and what are you currently listening to now?
Yeah, I used to. I mean, it depends how far back you want to go, but
Go way back. We can go as far back as
and
you want to go.
middle school's embarrassing. There was like, I wanted the instant gratification. I was listening to EDM to start. As soon as I could choose what music I wanted to listen to, I would start with EDM or a lot of like new metal. That's what I grew up with, like
Okay.
Linkin Park and Papa Roach and
Yeah,
Korn.
yeah.
Like that stuff. Like I just needed that. Like as soon as you turn on the track, it just slams you in the face.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
I think a lot of us start that way. We need, when we're young, music that's just instant gratification. No,
Right.
no subtlety. And then of course that develops. High school, that's when I got into jazz. That was the first time that I played with a group, and I was like, oh, this is what music is. It's not about practicing by yourself and then doing a recital twice a year.
Right.
It's
Right.
about playing together. And that was a huge, that changed my life forever. And I was addicted to jazz at that point. And I was listening to all the greats, Bill Evans and Herbie Hancock and Red Garland and Oscar Peterson. I was just trying to be like them. I was listening to them and just trying to copy everything they were doing.
Right.
So that's when I got super into the jazz greats, especially the pianist that I wanted to be like. And then moving into my undergrad years, I got more into fusion. I was like, okay, jazz is cool, but what if we could mix jazz with other things? Because that's what jazz has been since the beginning. It's been taking popular music from Broadway or whatever the most popular records were back in the day, and they would make jazz arrangements of it. They would improvise over it.
Yeah.
Add some 2-5-1s.
Right.
Boom.
Right. It's so interesting that because that term fusion is talking about a specific type of fusion, but it's always been fusion. Jazz has always been fusion. It's always been fused with the popular music of the day. And so, but when we think of fusion, we think of like that specific Weather Report, Steps Ahead, and all those wonderful artists and groups.
Right.
So okay, you're at fusion.
Right. So then I got really into fusion, not just that specific fusion, but any kind of thing where two different cultures were coming together to create music. I got really into this band called Tinariwen, which is a group from Mali that plays what some people call the Saharan blues, because they're desert nomads in the Sahara, but they created their form of music that then came to the US, and then blues artists started interpreting that, and the blues got sent back to them. They started hearing blues, and then blues mixed into their music, and they created this like, I mean, it's hard to describe. I would definitely check it out, but it's this like mix of blues and these gorgeous melodies from the Sahara nomad life. And I just got really into, okay, what if you mix like Afro-Peruvian? I got really into that, of like, wow, like African and Peruvian, like when that mixed, that was so cool. And jazz, like I said, is like that. Salsa is like that. Any kind of music that was mixing cultures. That's when I went to, I only made it through a semester of grad school, so I'll preface with that. But I did go to grad school for a semester for ethnomusicology, because I was just like, I want to learn about global music that is connecting cultures.
Yeah, I enjoyed. I took a couple of courses, I think during my graduate studies. Yes, and I really enjoyed ethnomusicology. It's interesting. It's you know, I feel like jazz has always been curious about other cultures and their musics, and you see tons of examples of people using like direct influences from other cultures, where they're actually not even fusing the music, but they're like playing with the music of their culture, how it would be expressed over here in a jazz format or in a quartet form. Like an example of that, I don't know if you ever heard Chris Potter's Togo on Underground, the record Underground. Yeah, that's I really dug that, you know, but it's based off like an African I don't want to say work song. I don't think it's a work song, but it's like, if you go find the actual song, it sounds very similar to what they're doing, although they're playing with it in a Chris Potter quartet style. I've always dug that. So okay, so it sounds like you're still there. That's where you landed with music, or is there another?
Well, the final step was kind of after this cruise ship experience, right? The reason why I moved into ethnomusicology in grad school is like, you know what? I want to teach music. I think that's the way. I found that I was good at it. I found it a lot more fulfilling. And I was like, you know what? I want to be a college professor. So I went the grad school route. It didn't really work for me because for many reasons, a bit of a complex moment in my life. But basically, I was in University of Illinois. I was in the middle of like, I don't know, 2-hour drive in any direction of just cornfields. And I was like, why am I studying global music in the middle of all these cornfields in Illinois? It doesn't make any sense. So I kept getting reprimanded by my professors because all I was doing was playing with bands. I was finding, oh, cool, there's a Indonesian gamelan band. Oh, cool, there's this Afro-Peruvian band. I started getting involved in all these different bands there, and they're like, "This is taking away from your education. You need to be reading about these, not playing." I was like,
"Yeah,
I gotta get out of here."
Yeah, that's kind of my gripe with the University of North Texas. It's there's a lot of reading about playing, and not a lot of playing outside of like classroom settings, you know, like, so improv class. That's not to say that there isn't, you know, I mean, because like the band, when I was there, the band Snarky Puppy came out of UNT, and that had nothing to do with the classes. So there was that happening, but it was a lot about like what you're saying, you know, you need to be reading about this music as opposed to actually experiencing it and learning and being educated from the musicians and the actual art itself. But that to me kind of seems like an issue with jazz education, maybe even education period, is that it moves away from the bandstand and the recording studios and touring to the textbooks, you know, and you have people that, again, no disrespect, they go from undergrad to grad right to teaching and have not experienced the music, you know. They haven't done a tour, they've never slept on a tour bus, they've never worked with a band, you know. And so it's like, it's just theory to them. And I feel like there's a inauthentic, I don't want to say it's inauthentic, there's just a depth that's missing in education that you can see from people who've, you know, played the music, who's who've spent time with the music and the cultures that you're describing. So
And like you said, it's not just music. That's the crazy thing.
Yeah.
My wife is actually runs a nonprofit of education activists, and from all around the world. She's also a very global person. She's half Indian, half Italian. So and grew up in Birmingham, Alabama. So like she understands the global mindset, and she's brought together all of these youth from around the world, and who are so dissatisfied with their education for this exact reason, because they're just reading books and writing about what they read in the books.
Yeah.
And that's not what we need in this world.
Yeah.
In music, in almost any subject, even the core subjects, English or language, math, science. I mean, you got to be applying this stuff that you learn by doing. We all do. Every human learns by doing. And you can read about it, but then you got to do it.
Right.
Otherwise, you're missing the most important part.
Right. I think that's why in the olden times, they used to have internships. They used to people would go and like apprenticeships, and study with people and see them and watch them and learn the difference between theory and what actually works and how it actually works and how it actually feels and how to make adjustments when things change. That's another thing that I think kind of our current education doesn't teach people how to be flexible and adapt and adjust, like we've all had to learn now with this pandemic. You know what I mean? Like I would boil down our biggest problem as a nation, as a world, with the inability to be flexible and make adjustments.
Yes. Amen.
I learned it was going to be this way. Okay, now I'm doing the formula. It's not working. Why is it not working? I'm getting angry. It's like, that goes all the way down to like how they teach in like elementary, middle. It's not about conceptual learning. Like this is the concept of addition. It's just 1 + 1 = 2. 2 + 2 = 4. They don't understand that you're adding one thing to another and it's coming out to this. And so it's like it's so frustrating. It was so frustrating to see how we struggled during the pandemic. And I really think it's a matter of understanding how to be flexible and making adjustments, and that comes from doing. As you would say, playing with life, learning how to play with life. Play with art, play with life. So we're almost out of time. I don't want to leave without giving you a chance to talk about your course and where people can sign up for your courses. So please.
Sure. Yeah, I'm not the best at shameless self-promotion, but I'll give it a shot. I've got a bunch of video courses that I've created. Again, all with this mentality of making art playful, making art accessible, and building a community around that. And I think it applies to exactly what we're talking about, of being flexible, or more like I would think of it as, how do you handle uncertainty? This is a really uncertain time, and this has put everyone to the test. How can you handle uncertainty? And that's what improvisation is.
Yeah.
You don't know what the next measure is going to be. You might not even know what the next note you're going to play is. Even as your finger's coming down to push it, you just got to believe it. And within a community, that's so much more effective. So anyway, I've got video courses that are around that, and live classes that are group classes, again, to co-elevate each other, support each other, inspire one another. And those are all through my website, weartplay.com, or we.artplay is my Instagram handle if you want to just check out these kind of educational videos that I'm creating and get a feel for it. But would love to have anyone who's listening join the community and learn how to play with art together.
Awesome. That's, man, thank you so much. It has been an absolute pleasure to actually talk with somebody. And I'm not joking. I really love your page. I love what you're doing.
Thank you.
I've watched multiple videos multiple times back to back, and I do think that you're doing a great thing by making the music accessible, easily understandable. I don't feel like you're dumbing it down. I feel like you're making it understandable, and like you say, you're giving people building blocks to really approach this music to play.
Mhm.
Man, yeah, and I would love to have you back sometime, man.
For
I,
sure,
wa-
for sure.
I would love to keep this relationship going and building, and anything I can do with the Jazzer to help, just let me know. It's definitely my pleasure to help
Yeah, I
support.
sincerely appreciate that, and yeah, I'd be happy to be back on the podcast. And yes, let's stay in touch for sure.
Absolutely. All right. So thank you so much for listening. If you made it this far, we really appreciate it. If you're listening on the podcast, be sure to like and subscribe. If you're listening on Facebook, you know what to do. And anywhere else, we're going to have this up on Instagram. I promise. I know I said it last time, but believe me, this time I'm going to make it happen. So
Mhm.
until the next time, stay